directed to either Jeff or Ed McLaughlin. And that is, I have been under the impression that not all of the money from gaming was directed for education. In the beginning, not all of it was directed to education. Are you familiar with that?
Answer this the best way I can. I wasn't around during the January administration period. I mean, I was here, but I didn't track it as closely. You know, he played some word games. He said the money would go to education. What he didn't, I think he failed to mention, he said it was going to go into the general fund, and then from the general fund, the education system would be funded. And that is typically what happens. Earmarking dollars can be very dangerous because the state runs into other problems and issues. I mean, you can use transportation, but I like looking at it as a flood or something of that nature where the state has to have access to dollars. That's why we have a general fund. It's similar to your checkbook. You don't just, you may isolate it within your checkbook to pay your bills, but it's a checking account and all the money goes into that. I think our biggest problem in the legislature, and I've been public about this before, is being able to track the administration's spending and being able to follow all the money that comes into the state through other monies. That's our biggest problem. But yes and no. The answer to the question is yes and no. If the money does get put into education, it just takes a route to do it. It goes through the general fund.
The question, Carol. As many of you may recall, the problem that was facing Governor Jankel at the time when the lottery money came in is that we were relying on property taxes to a major degree. And this is actually new revenue that was then put into the state, and it didn't go into the general fund. Now, you can argue whether it was all to have gone only to education or not, but education is earmarked in the Constitution as a state responsibility, and as such the state has to fund it. But when you're faced with all of the realities of running all of the state government, the commitment, I think, to put at least 50% of it into the cause of education for higher ed, K-12, and the low-tech schools is still the major expenditure in the state.
Is that District 35?
Yes.
Yes.
I also came across a lot of people that thought the funds were for education, and I think this points to problems that politicians have, or how they do no service to the people by not being straight with them. We were told that it would go into the education fund, and this is one of the reasons that got me involved, because there's so much of that. There's so much talk, saying one thing and doing the other. For instance, how we always hear how important our teachers are, but yet we don't pay them. And it's talking on both sides of your mouth. And it's just disingenuous, and I think it leads to people not feeling good about their government when we are misled. And so certainly will do my best to not be involved in misleading people. Thank you.
We perceived that lottery money went to education, but they believe it was sold that lottery money would go to education. And I hear that all the time. The truth is that probably not only does lottery money go to education, but a whole lot more. Appropriations can tell you how much we have increased education in our state. We need, as South Dakotans, to put children and education as a priority, and we all know that. The school formula needs to be changed. It needs to be more equitable for Western South Dakota, and if it has been changed in the last year or the last 2 years, we live in the western part of South Dakota where we have one major city and the rest are low-density schools, and if it had been changed, we probably would not have had the $3 million shortfall that we felt this spring was much discussed.
I appreciate Representative McLaughlin's comment and the point about, the pie is only so big it has to be divided. But I've knocked on over 2,000 doors in the last 6 months, and I'll tell you, Representative McLaughlin, the universal feeling among people in our community is that there was an understanding that those dollars were supposed to be going 100% to help education. And the legislature took those dollars and is using them to fund other programs.
Informational chart here, and it can be passed around, and it shows that in fiscal year 09, the projected is $109,801,305 from the video lottery deposited into the state's general fund, and the sales, state sales tax and other revenue is $270 million, and so it shows that there is over $100 million that's going. It says all the video lottery money and more than double that amount in other state taxes will go to local schools. And I don't know if you want to see that or not, but
You know, we always say the surrounding states have a lot of resources and therefore we can't compete in education. And that's really quite nonsensical. We have 4 trust funds that total nearly $1 billion. One of those, the Educational Enhancement Fund, is $400 billion by itself. And what we do with those funds is say that we treat them as rainy day funds. We just roll the interest over all the time, invest a minimal amount of money in operations, and try to grow. This last session, the Secretary has had a proposal that we take a portion of the interest off that trust fund, just a portion of the interest, and that would have generated $10 million more this year. If we did it for 5 successive years at that rate, while that fund still continued to grow, we would have had enough money to ultimately bring teacher salaries up in this area to be able to compete. So the money is there, it just has to be used differently. We need to invest in our children and our teachers, not just in the market. And it's been, look at what has happened to the market in the meantime.
The problem in how we fund education is actually the formulary. It isn't so much the funding base, although that's a major part of the problem.